Thank you, John. John's a great conference with Jimmy and the gang. Here's my clicker. So I'm going to, I put together some slides just in the last few days to get my thinking on some topics and to talk to you all about it. As alluded to earlier, Bitcoin for us, Max, Keiser, Stacy Herbert, you know, it's the censorship resistance is a huge factor to the protocol because we as journalists are part of an era when this is becoming a danger. Free speech is being criminalized. And so this is another reason we come at this space. It offers this censorship resistance across a couple of platforms. So anyway, this is my Twitter handle. This is our fund, Heisenberg Capital. It's been around since 2013. It's not our main job, but we ended up getting some really cool things in the fund. Like Kraken is up 100x now, and Bitstamp just had an exit strategy. Shapeshift, we were in the seed. Bitfinex, they fed out a few dividends bigger than the initial investment. Bitso is in Mexico, the biggest exchange there. BitPesa is in Kenya. BitPay, Tony Galippi invited us to Prague in 2011. He's the first guy to give us Bitcoin. He paid our way to go to this conference in Prague in Bitcoin. And that's how we got our first Bitcoin. Casa Hodl, we just added. We love the team there. Jameson Lopp is an outstanding resource in this space. He brought us into Casa Hodl. Kim.com. Kim.com, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, once in New York. He was desperately in need of money. And I made a call to my friend Simon Dixon at Bank to the Future. And within 12 hours, we had put something up on the site and funded. He raised a bunch of money and kept him going. We're big supporters of Kim. He's facing a lot of problems. Unicoin in India. SunX is solar power to crypto. So these are people we've met along the way, and these are all outstanding people. They're working on outstanding projects, and we happen to pick up some equity along the way, and so we're have this fund. And to give you an idea of our thinking on this, if I can make this work, I call this activist venture capital. So this is something that I'm actively looking at now. Azteco is Bitcoin vouchers. So this is the people behind Azteco, Beautyon, who I follow. I think he's an outstanding guy in the space, and this is a project of his. I met with the team in San Francisco recently. So we're doing our due diligence on Azteco right now. It's a pretty simple idea, Bitcoin vouchers. It's not a super sexy project, but it gives merchants the ability to sell Bitcoin at the point of sale. And I think that's, in this space, we got to put Bitcoin in people's hands. So that's what I say, activist venture capital. So we're not going to necessarily look for maximum ROI. You know, we're looking for ways to improve the ecosystem and to push Bitcoin and the philosophy further. And even talking about it, you know, I'm risking boosting the valuation against my own interests. But that's okay, because this is all about building this protocol and building this philosophy and having this hard money, and I will get more into why that's important. So, modern story of Bitcoin, for me, I say it begins in 1971. Nixon ended Bretton Woods. We went off the gold standard, and we entered into a period of infinite regress of fiat money. So fiat money became reference to other fiat money. So the US dollar, the yen, all these various fiat money currencies, they reference each other. They don't reference gold any longer. There's no hard money. It's infinite regress. It's like the old joke of the turtle is holding up the universe, and when asked, well, who's holding up the turtle? And the answer is, well, there's just turtles all the way down. It's just it's an infinite daisy chain of fraud perpetrated by the central banks. And this gave rise not only to fiat money and bullshit economics and bullshit consumer price index data, but it gave rise to central banks as players in this economy and gave rise to things like market fundamentalism, financial fanaticism, interest rate apartheid. So market fundamentalism, this is the idea that markets are kind of like, I always say, like a Ben Bernanke and an Osama bin Laden are two sides of the same coin. They're terrorists in their own rights. A religious terrorist will misquote the Quran, selectively misquote the Quran to justify all kinds of extremism, and Ben Bernanke will misquote Adam Smith to justify all kinds of financial extremism. The extremists in other countries might go to madrasas, and Ben Bernanke will go to Harvard or Yale. This is where they learn their financial terrorism skills. They use weapons of mass financial destruction. So does Ben Bernanke. He uses weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett called them. Interest rate apartheid. This is a situation where if you've got a good relationship with Goldman Sachs, you can borrow money at 0%. If you don't, you're borrowing money at a credit card rate or a payday loan rate. And so they use interest rates to create bastustans of ghettos. So we live in ghettos of high interest rates. They live in gated communities of low interest rates. So this is all the way using monetary policy, central bank policy, to create all kinds of social problems. They created the biggest bond bubble in 3,000 years. Is Bitcoin in a bubble? Not compared to the bond market. The bond market interest rates have never been this low in thousands of years. The rise of financial terrorism. Here's our friend Jamie Dimon. So when you lower the cost of interest rates to zero, the cost of creating all those weapons of mass financial destruction also goes down to zero. And you've created a whole generation of these suicide bankers who are willing to kill themselves and everyone around them for their market fundamentalist principles, for their fanaticism. Leading to headlines like this. Here's an RBS unit. They told their staff to let clients hang themselves. Here's an Australia top bank charging dead clients for advice. Here's Lloyd's. Sales insurance policies earned around double points on sales. The pressure was great that in one case an advisor sold insurance to himself, his wife and colleague in order to hit his target and prevent himself from being demoted. So this is obviously, psychosis. Here's Wachovia laundered $380 billion in drug money. Bank finding drug cartels. Huge. Obviously, they talk about Bitcoin used in illicit activity. Any study you look at, it's maybe 1 or 2%. Whereas in the main banking operations like Wells Fargo, they're laundering hundreds of billions of dollars in drug money, and that's obviously the U.S. dollar and pound are where you find all the abuses. This is monetizing poor people. If you remember Tim Geithner from the 2008 crisis, he's gone on to form a financial company that is randomly sending checks to people in the mail that are suffering financially in the hopes that they cash them, and it immediately sets them up with a 30% loan. And then they have a staff of lawyers, and the second you miss a payment, they sue you. So, that's totally abusive. They're monetizing poor people. Here's Ron Paul. It's no coincidence that the century of total war coincided with the century of central banking. This is kind of new. Ken Griffith buys the most expensive home ever sold in the U.S. for $238 million. Ken Griffith at Citadel, a hedge fund, were completely bailed out in 2008. If it wasn't for the bailout, this guy would be selling hot dogs in Times Square. Okay, he got totally bailed out by who? Ben Bernanke. Where does Ben Bernanke work now? Citadel. It's a total daisy chain of terrorism. I don't use that. I'm not being glib there. I believe these guys are legitimately terrorist organizations, financial terrorism. So that brings us to 2008. Of course, we get the white paper, and we get the Genesis block, Chancellor on brink of second bailout, and my shirt here. I got to up my fashion game because Jimmy Song's got the hat. And now we all got to figure out ways to up our fashion game. Who knows where that's going? And of course, so now enter Bitcoin. And it's the number one use case for Bitcoin. This is the main point of my presentation today. The number one use case for Bitcoin. Number one use case for Bitcoin. Monetizing dissent. Monetizing dissent. We've had the monetization of the poor. We've had the monetization of fraud. We've had the monetization of corruption. We've had the monetization of everything except dissent. Now we have it. It's called Bitcoin. That's what we fight back with. To clean up the mess of fiat money. And we see it, it's happening before our eyes. The global insurrection against banker occupation, or GIABO as we call it. We talked about it on Keiser report now for years. It's happening, whether it was Occupy Wall Street or the Arab Spring, the Gilets jaunes in France. It's about rising up against the banker occupation. And, this is very encouraging. This shows that the folks that are the victims of financial terrorism are beginning to understand where the problem comes from. And it comes from banks. And they understand now, they're starting to understand that Bitcoin is the solution. Here's another famous shot of the resistance. There's Janet Yellen. And this gentleman, I met him in Mexico last year. I was with Stacy on the beach. This young man comes up. So I'm really happy to meet the mom and dad of Bitcoin. It's like, oh, that's nice. That's very nice. Max Keiser calls Bitcoin the currency of resistance in interview with Bitcoin Core. So I'm pushing this out there all the time. When I ask me to my commenting on stuff, I'm pushing this pretty hard. Because that's my main function, is to try to get all of these disparate resistance and groups and activist groups around the world to join together, become huge Bitcoin supporters, because I believe that this is monetizing dissent. This is how you quantify the pushback against what needs to be pushed back. Of course, we see in Venezuela, government's melting down. You already have Bitcoin ATMs. Bitcoin is there. Other cryptocurrencies are there. And so this is where the adoption curve is going to be. It's going to be in countries that desperately need it. The U.S. world reserve currency with the U.S. dollar is not necessarily going to be the place where Bitcoin is adopted the fastest or the greatest, because we all have a huge benefit accrued to us via the dollar. And but in these other countries that are the victim of the dollar, they are looking for a solution. And it makes sense to me that this is where you see the uptake. Across Africa as well, where economies want to get past the economics that have kept these countries from developing. They can get past it with Bitcoin. This is an interesting chart of the halvings to give you my comment on price. This is the protocol is ingenious in that it gets scarcer and scarcer, and the need for Bitcoin gets higher and higher, and so that results in a higher price. And so it's this beautiful, elegant balanced incentive scheme that is, so as somebody described it, it's a way to bring about social justice disguised as a get-rich-quick scheme. So that's the first part of the end of my first part. I have my second part, which is the story of Bitcoin that began 200,000 years ago. Do you want to hear that part too? Yeah. That's great. I raced through that bit kind of fast. All righty. 200,000 years ago. The hard money. And I'll say up front, I do borrow heavily from Saif Dean Ammous's book, The Bitcoin Standard. It is an instant classic. And, it got me digging deep into my own thinking about all this stuff. So, oh my God, who's that? What's up? Wow, why couldn't it all worked out? It looked so good there for a few weeks, didn't it? So hard money. You think about it. Humans, going back to the beginning of humans, it's all about our wanderlust. Humans like to move around. We like to travel. We like to expand. We're globalizing. And when we do that, we trade. We trade because that's how we interact with other humans as we're going through, evolution. And to do that, a concept that evolved was the concept of value. If I trade something with you 10,000 years ago, and I walk away, and I suddenly discover that the thing that you traded with me for is shit, my recourse is to beat the crap out of you. There's a study that proves that the human face evolved in the way it did after taking millions of punches. We come from a very violent place. And so value is like, okay, we've done a trade, and the thing that I traded you for, then a week later, a month later, a year later, I can trade it again. I can trade it on. It maintained its value. It has, trade value. It's not shit. I was able to take that arrowhead, and a year later, I traded it again and got a goat or whatever. So this idea of trade and trade value kind of part and parcel with our development as humans. And then after thousands of years, we figured out that, well, there is actually something that we can all agree that we want to trade in, that we all value. No matter where I go, I can always get gold. I can always trade gold. If I have gold, it's always good. No one says no to gold. And so gold became then something that we call money. Money became gold, and money is something that has trade value that is persistent. It goes through time. I can take my value into the future. And that's why gold is money, and that's what the definition of money is. And that we have another phrase for that. It's called medium of exchange. Okay, great. Then enter the Bank of England in 1694. We enter a period of fiat money. And fiat money is replacing gold with representations of gold. And fiat money eventually moves completely away from having value that you can take into the future. And fiat money then, it takes us back to the beginning of this slideshow. Fiat money then becomes infinite regress. So it takes us all the way back to the 70s. And the idea of monetization and monetary policy and central banks as the high priests that are determining our lives based on them giving value to these pieces of paper, the fiat money. And so when you get back to Bitcoin, you have, in fact, gotten all the way back to where we were, 10,000 years ago. One of the great advantages to that is that it promotes peace. Because if I'm trading with you fairly, as I mentioned earlier, I am not doing so in a way that you're incentivized to beat the crap out of me. When we trade unfairly with each other, if I were to trade, let's say, Bitcoin for something that's completely worthless, like Bitcoin Cash, that would create a violent response, right? This guy here, there's a lot of people that want to kill this motherfucker because he traded shit. He didn't trade something of value. So he's promoting violence. What's the number one? According to Paul Krugman in the New York Times, he wrote recently another of many critiques of Bitcoin. He's saying, well, after all, the U.S. dollar, people say it's not backed by anything. Well, in fact, it is backed by something. It's backed by men with guns, according to Paul Krugman in the New York Times. Well, that sounds coercive to me. That doesn't sound peaceful to me. That doesn't sound like I would voluntarily want to accept your fiat money. It sounds like you've got a guy with a gun and a tank and an army forcing me to take your fiat money. He doesn't see any problem with that. What's Americans' foreign policy? We want you to take dollars. Okay, you run Libya. You want to trade oil in something other than dollars? We're gonna fucking kill you. Oh, let's say you're Saddam Hussein. You want to trade in something other than dollars, your oil? Okay, we'll hang you. That's American foreign policy. take our dollars away, we'll kill you. No, that's nice. What's happening in Venezuela right now? Something similar. So that's violent, and violence is not what we're trying to achieve as a community of peace-loving folks. Fair trade promotes peace because people don't feel ripped off because they understand a universally accepted definition of value, and Bitcoin fits that description. And so if I am at MSNBC and I'm supported by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin Marietta are my sponsors, and therefore I like wars. If I'm CNN and I'm having shock and awe in Iraq and broadcasting it like a Hollywood production, why is that? Because I'm being paid to promote ultimately Fiat bullshit backed up by men with guns. So as journalists, that's what we deal with, because we believe that there's another story to tell, and we try to tell that story. And Bitcoin's part of that story. It takes us all over the world, and we meet lots of people, and they appreciate that story. But it's not a popular story with the powers that be. As you can imagine, we get a lot of pushback from folks that would prefer that we don't tell this story, that there's a peaceful way forward with hard money. Altcoins, let's see, Bitcoin derangement syndrome. This is something I came up with recently. How many people saw that film, Bird Box? So it was Netflix, I think, is a film. And if you look at the evilness outside, you're encouraged to kill yourself. You have a psychotic breakdown and you kill yourself. And which brings me to this is the bird box of altcoins. But Bitcoin derangement syndrome is real. You know, people who look directly into the protocol who are not prepared to be honest with themselves will get killed by the protocol. I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone insane in this space. Okay, Roger's just one of them, but we can name 10 or 15 people pretty easily. You know, I've battled with Bitcoin derangement system myself over the years. It's not that easy to deal with. You know, just to touch briefly on this idea, and Safety does a great job talking about this. You know, there's this idea that the definition of cash means Visa and MasterCard, but if you just replace the word cash with gold, then the whole thing makes sense. And that's the way you got to read it. It's gold. It's just not Visa. Okay? That's bottom line. That's full stop, period. If anything else enters your consciousness, you're going to enter Bitcoin derangement syndrome, and you'll probably try to kill yourself. Okay, don't get worried. Call Tone. Tone will talk you down. That's the end of part 2. Then I just got a lot of random shit from here. Even more random. Here's a gold mark. Was 1 for 1. It happens in hyperinflation. It went to $1 trillion to 1. People say, where's the price of Bitcoin going? You know, I have more confidence that the banks are going to crash than Bitcoin going higher. Like, I don't need to know where Bitcoin's going higher because I know that the banks are going to continue to crash. I know Deutsche Bank's is insolvent. I know that they're going to go down to zero. I know these fiat currencies are going to crash. So, you know, look at the Weimar Republic. You know, that they went to $1 trillion to 1. You know, Bitcoin could go to $1 trillion to 1 against the dollar, because the dollar will be is toilet paper. It's nothing. It's garbage. I usually rip up the dollar at this point to emphasize this, but both hands are full, so I'll spare you that prop. Oh, this is just people say, well, you know, what is Bitcoin? It solves the double spend problem. That's what it is. That's the beginning and the end. That's it. Everything else is an interpretation that Satoshi ended up inventing hard money by solving this problem. But anyway, I'm sure I'll get a lot of flack for that. Um, what the hell? Oh yeah, there's Cargman. This is interesting. So I put out some tweets a while back that hash rate drives price. So it's like, what do you mean? No, price drives hash rate. The price goes up and then gets the hash rate. But there is a school of thought to suggest that the Bitcoin derangement syndrome, the people who think that they can control Bitcoin by controlling the hash rate, it can drive price. So during the whole Bitmain Jihan Wu phase, those guys were playing God. They were like, we're going to fuck Bitcoin and we're going to introduce a new coin. That drove a lot of hash rate. That drove a lot of price. So there's an interesting give and take there. Individual sovereign. This is a lot of the statistics about how the economy's been crushed by debt. Every fiat currency since the Romans first began the practice in the first century has entered in devaluation and collapse. The average lifespan of fiat money is 27 years. Every single one that's ever been created has gone to zero. Not a single one has survived. The U.S. dollar in 71, right? It went from gold back to fiat, so it's overdue to go to zero. Here's the U.S. dollar. Started off in 28 there, redeemable in gold. Then they changed it to legal tender for debts, et cetera, and then finally to this. This is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So you see that the transition basically away from any connection to anything tangible to just a bunch of words on a piece of paper. Piece of shit. More criminals. You want to see the criminals? Look at this guy, George Osborne. Look at this fucking pig. Look at this guy. Fuck you. So Osborne, they bailed out HSBC, and he actually got the U.S. government to. They changed. It's just a nightmare. I can't even talk about it. It's making me sad. This is an interesting story about what happens on Wall Street and the kind of lunacy that goes on Wall Street. So I worked on Wall Street, and the people with certain kinds of brain damage may make better investment decisions because they completely lack empathy. So if you have folks that have autistic maybe or something like this, where they have or other types of issues where their empathy is completely devoid, is scrapped. So those people are actively recruited by Wall Street because they don't want people thinking about the consequences of their action. And so typically performance on Wall Street equates to a complete lack of empathy. And so you have a whole generation of these mad psychos doing what they do. This is very interesting in that you have like publications like Forbes magazine, they have bots or AI writing stories. So the bots pick up on data, they crank out a narrative. It's called narrative science. And then that story is picked up by bots that are trading the stock exchange. And they read the story and then they adjust prices. They flood the market with orders. So 80 to 90% of all the orders are computer generated. And those orders are the basis of those bots reading the stories written by other bots. Then the bots see the prices on the exchange that have changed due to the bots that have read the work of the bots, and they write a new story written by bots. And of course, that is picked up by the bots. And then they do a lot of trading and prices change again. So there's no humans involved in this process. The price discovery of all securities at this point are completely artificial. There are no actual prices. There's no actual price discovery in any of these markets. And you have this is why Bitcoin is gaining traction, because it actually has all the characteristics that we want in a free market capitalist system where people can have value that they can move into the future and trade peacefully with each other. That's what we want. Okay, buddy. Good. I'm glad. This is in the UK. They had too much debt to GDP, so they decided to redefine GDP by including drugs and prostitution. So the sex workers, sex data shows work generated 5.3 billion for the economy, and according to estimates, there are 60,000 prostitutes in the UK who had an average of 25 clients per week, each paying an average of 67 pounds, 16p per visit. Same thing with heroin users. And so they simply added that to GDP, and magically the debt looks smaller. So that's the government. The government deciding that it could be the Sackler family when they're selling artificial heroin in the form of the OxyContin. OxyContin deaths last year were greater than all the soldiers lost in Vietnam War. You had more than 57,000 dead because the Sackler family decided to become heroin pushers in America. Who's the terrorist? Where's your God now? No, they're amongst us. They're amongst us. The economics of extinction. Here's a 600-pound bluefish, tuna, $3 million. The price of these tuna keep going up because they're becoming extinct. Okay, so we got bots writing bots, reading bots, writing bots. At what point do the bots consider our prices to need to go up? Let's force 3 billion of those suckers off the grid. Now the price of the humans just went up. Right? This type of thinking, the point is that this type of thinking is rife, and it's wrong, and it's damaging, and it's bred because there are no true values in the economy. And again, Bitcoin brings in value, true value, hard money. And I'll leave you with this one. Price of rhino semen's going up. Finally paying off. Again, the economics of extinction. The poor rhinos are becoming extinct, but their semen is rising in price. So this is my answer to the Me Too movement. And no, that's not actually true. See, we do have value. Please don't shoot me. That's okay. Well, as you can tell, this was a bit rambling, but hopefully made a few points along the way. I don't know what that is. I'm gonna thank you so much. I'm gonna get off the stage, and thanks to Unconfiscatable and Tone and Jimmy and all these guys, and Stacy in the back. And thanks for watching Keiser Report. We'll see you again soon.